Okay, so you've sent us some really interesting stuff about this Forged Act.
Yeah.
And I think we both kind of zeroed in on Section 205.
Absolutely.
And this whole concept of capstone requirements for, the way the military buys and develops its new weapons and tech.
Yeah, for our listener, this could be a really big deal. This could actually change how we think about getting new technology, new capabilities into the hands of our forces, and how we can do it faster and smarter.
Yeah, exactly. And we've been looking through some excerpts, specifically from a document called Capstone Requirements, Modernizing Military Acquisition.
Right.
So our goal today really is to kind of go deep on this particular recommendation. How's it supposed to work, and what needs to be in place for it to actually be a success. So maybe let's start with like the real basics. What are these capstone requirements? What are we even talking about here?
So I think the core of Section 205 is really about empowering those portfolio acquisition executives, those PAEs, we've talked about them before, and giving them a new level of influence. And the goal here is speed, agility, and I think most importantly, innovation. We want to build that into the DoD's acquisition process.
So when you say speed and agility, it kind of makes me think of like iterative development, right? Like not just a rigid plan, but like you build something, you test it, you learn from it, and you refine it as you go.
Absolutely.
How different is that from the way the DoD has, traditionally done things?
Well, for decades, the DoD's been known for having, frankly, slow acquisition processes, rigid,
right.
Very specific requirements, and it was a big pain to make any kind of changes.
Yeah, it's like they try to predict the future perfectly before they even started building anything, right?
Right. And with capstone requirements, we're acknowledging that we can't predict the future.
Yeah.
So the development process itself needs to be able to adapt as things change.
Which, I've seen in a lot of the background research that we did, like GAO reports, even like analyses from stressreports.congress.gov.
Yeah.
This has been a big critique of the DoD acquisition process, for a while.
And in the sources themselves, they point out that these traditional system-specific requirements, they really solidified during the Cold War.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And that, made sense at the time.
Yeah.
But looking at defense.gov, their own histories, it really seems like it become kind of a roadblock.
Yeah. I even remember back in 2016, there was that big push for more agility. Right? Like it was part of the NDAA.
Right.
And the document mentions some successes with prototyping.
Right.
They even cite innovation.defense.gov as a source for that.
Yeah. And what's interesting is this really builds on those previous reform efforts.
Okay.
So the GAO and even the Defense Science Board, as you see on dsb.cto.mil,
okay,
have been pretty critical of these, kind of static requirements, saying that they really actually hurt innovation.
Yeah.
Right? They're not helping us get new stuff faster.
Yeah, right.
And they've been saying, hey, we need to move towards, broader, more outcome-focused frameworks.
So it seems like, Section 5618, which was introduced back in December of 2024,
right,
is taking these ideas and actually, putting them into law.
Yeah.
And, it's not just happening in a vacuum either. They talk about involving the joint requirements and programming board, the JRPB.
Right. And that's an important point.
Okay.
This isn't just like checking a box. Right. That JRPB consultation, that's supposed to be where like the strategic vision of the DoD is aligned with the portfolio approach, the capstone requirements approach.
Gotcha. So it's like adapting those checks and balances, not like throwing them out the window.
Exactly. This really is the combination of years of work to try to modernize this whole process.
So, okay, let's talk about, what are the benefits that are supposed to come out of this? What are I think they use the term desired effects in the document.
Right.
What are the good things that they're hoping to see with these capstone requirements?
Okay, so the document lays out several key desired effects, as they call them.
Yeah.
First and foremost, faster capability delivery.
Okay.
They want to be able to give those PAEs, those acquisition executives, the ability to make adjustments on the fly.
Okay.
So that we can get those capabilities out to the people who need them faster.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, the less time you're locked into a rigid spec that might be outdated.
Right.
The faster you can actually get stuff out there.
Exactly.
What else are they hoping for?
Second, a huge boost to innovation. So the idea is that by focusing on prototyping and minimum viable products, we can actually shape the requirements of a system based on real-world testing.
Wow. So that's really interesting. So instead of like this theoretical perfect version of a system driving the development,
Right.
it's like, how does it actually perform in the real world?
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty cool. That's pretty game-changing, potentially. What else? What's number 3?
Third is enhanced operational relevance.
Okay.
This is where those operational reps, the people who are actually going to be using this stuff,
Right.
they get a say in how it's developed.
Okay.
So their frontline experience can make sure that what we're building actually meets the needs of the warfighter.
So, making sure that the users are actually like part of the conversation.
Exactly, from the beginning.
From the beginning. Okay, that seems like a pretty big improvement, frankly.
Right.
Okay, keep going. What else?
So number 4, they want to streamline, simplify the way we buy commercial stuff, things off the shelf.
Right.
If we can meet the need with something that already exists,
Right.
let's cut through the red tape and get it into the field.
And then
And finally, they want better alignment of those acquisition portfolios with overarching goals. The idea is to use these capstone sets, they call them,
Okay.
to make sure that each program is actually contributing to that bigger picture.
So like making sure that every piece actually fits into the puzzle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually helping us achieve those goals.
Okay, so those all sound, pretty good in theory.
Yeah.
But I think with any big change like this, you've got to think about like what could go wrong.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
what does the document say about potential negative impacts? Like, what are the downsides they're considering?
Right. So one thing they point out is this increased flexibility. While it has a lot of advantages,
Right.
it could also lead to, weakened oversight, right?
Okay.
If we don't have really clear guidelines in place,
Right.
things could get misaligned.
Yeah.
Stuff might not work as intended.
So it's like, are we trading speed for a higher chance of ending up with something that isn't quite right?
Right. Right.
It's a tough question, right? Like, what's the acceptable trade-off there?
Exactly.
What else?
Well, all this iteration, right? Changing things as we go.
Yeah.
That could actually be confusing for developers.
Oh, yeah, I could see that.
Constantly changing requirements
Right.
could drive up costs. It could even cause more delays as they're trying to keep up with all these changes.
Yeah, yeah.
Stability is important.
Stability and, like, having clear goals.
I'll say absolutely.
Okay, what else?
They also raise a point about the operational reps,
Yeah.
right? The warfighters giving their input.
Yeah.
Well, they might not have a ton of experience with, like, the actual acquisition process itself.
Right.
So their feedback, while valuable,
Right.
could maybe unintentionally skew priority
You gotcha.
or lead to unrealistic expectations.
Okay, so it's like we need to find a way to, like, bridge those two worlds, right?
Exactly.
Okay, what about all this emphasis on buying commercial stuff? Like, are there any risks there?
Right. If we're pushing for, fast adoption of commercial tech,
Yeah.
we might end up skipping some of that really rigorous testing that we usually do with military-specific systems.
Yeah, we don't want to just rush something out there
Exactly.
because it's quick if it's not actually going to work, right?
Exactly. It needs to be up to the task.
Okay, what's the last potential downside they mentioned?
Okay, so they also talk about this portfolio focus, right? Which is good in a lot of ways,
Right.
but it could potentially lead to, like, neglecting some very specific system-level needs.
Okay.
And if we're not careful, it could even fragment joint interoperability.
Oh, so, like, we're so focused on the big picture
Right.
that the individual pieces don't actually work together.
Exactly. We got to make sure all those pieces are talking to each other.
So it's like this balancing act, right? How do we get all the good stuff
Right.
while, minimizing those potential downsides?
Right, right.
And the document does address that, right?
It does.
They talk about, like, specific ways to address these issues.
Absolutely.
What are some of the, I think they call them mitigation?
Mitigations, yeah.
What are some of the things they're proposing to, to keep these risks in check?
So to address that weakened oversight issue, they're saying we need regular JRPB audits. Right. This is going to make sure that those capstone requirements
Right.
are staying aligned with the DoD's strategic goals.
So that's good. There's still accountability there.
Exactly.
What about the potential for confusion, for the developers who are having to deal with all these changes?
Right. So they're saying we need clear guidelines for how these iterations are going to work.
Right.
And really importantly, training for the developers.
Okay.
So they understand this new, more dynamic process.
So communication and preparation are key.
Absolutely.
What about the operational reps, right? The ones who might not have a ton of acquisition experience?
Right. So they were talking about specific training programs for them
Okay.
to give them the basics of like how the acquisition process works.
Makes sense, given the tools they need to be effective.
Right.
What about the quality of the commercial stuff?
Right. So they're saying we need minimum testing standards
Right.
for any commercial item that we're going to use.
Okay.
So we're not sacrificing quality just for speed.
So you're still getting the benefit of, getting things quickly,
Right.
but you're not skipping those crucial steps.
Exactly.
And then what about that last one, like the portfolio focus potentially leading to like problems with systems talking to each other?
Right. So they're saying we need to keep those key performance parameters
Okay.
for those really crucial systems, especially where interoperability is a big deal.
Gotcha. So making sure that even though we're thinking about the portfolio,
Right.
we're not forgetting about those individual systems needing to actually work together.
Right. Exactly.
So it's a whole like multi-pronged approach, like
Yeah,
trying to, address all these potential issues.
Right.
Now, who are the people who are actually going to be most affected by this? Like who's actually going to have to change the way they do things?
So the document names a few groups. Definitely those PAEs, the portfolio acquisition executives.
Right.
They're going to have more authority,
Right.
but also a lot more pressure to adapt.
Yeah, that's a big shift in responsibility for them, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Right.
The operational reps, right, like we talked about.
Right, they're going to have a much bigger role.
They're going to be more hands-on.
Yeah, and probably a learning curve there, too.
Definitely.
What about, like, the bigger organizations?
So the military department secretaries, the defense agency directors, they're going to be overseeing all this.
Okay.
And they're going to have to adjust, their oversight mechanisms.
Right, right.
And then, of course, the whole acquisition workforce.
Right. Everyone who actually does this work on a day-to-day basis.
They're all going to have to adapt to this new way of doing things.
So it's a pretty widespread impact, it sounds like.
It is.
Now, I mean, anytime you have a big change like this, you're going to have people pushing back, right?
Absolutely.
So who do they think might resist this? And, like, what are their reasons?
So they point to traditional acquisition managers.
Oh, yeah.
The folks who are used to those very detailed specs
Right.
and that predictable process.
Yeah.
They might feel like they're losing control.
Yeah, I can imagine that being a tough adjustment.
Absolutely.
What about the service branches themselves?
So the services might be worried about losing influence over, like, the specific systems that they think are really important.
Right.
They might worry that this portfolio focus is going to overshadow their priorities.
Okay, and then what about the contractors, like the companies that actually build this stuff?
Yeah, so contractors, their business models, they often like predictable requirements,
Yeah.
stable funding,
Right.
and this new system
Right.
with all this iteration and changing things as we go.
Yeah.
It could be a lot of uncertainty for them.
So potential resistance from like multiple different angles.
Right.
It seems like for this to work, it's going to take more than just like changing the rules on paper.
Absolutely.
They also talk about the need for additional resources. What are some of the things that they're saying are going to be necessary to actually make this work?
So they specifically say we need funding for prototyping facilities, right? We got to be able to build and test this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
They also say we need training, and a lot of it,
Okay.
for both those PAEs
Okay.
and the operational reps.
Right.
So everybody understands how this new process works.
And then, anytime you add new work, you probably need new people, right?
Exactly. They're saying we're going to need more people to handle those JRPB consultations and all the extra work that comes with managing these portfolios.
So it's not just about the policy itself.
Right.
It's about actually investing in the infrastructure.
Right.
And most importantly, the people.
Yeah.
Okay, so how are we actually going to know if this is working?
Right.
Like, what are the specific measures of success that they're going to be tracking?
So they have a few key metrics they're going to look at. They want to see a 30% reduction in the time it takes to field new capabilities.
Oh.
They want to see at least 50% of prototypes actually transition to fielded systems.
Okay.
And they want to see an operational feedback satisfaction rate of 80% or higher.
Oh, interesting.
And they're going to be tracking all this through DoD reports.
Okay, so some pretty clear benchmarks.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see how those numbers change over time.
Absolutely.
Now, before they landed on this particular approach.
Yeah,
Did they consider any other options?
they did.
Like, were there any alternative approaches that they thought about?
Yeah, so one idea was to, like, beef up the existing agile frameworks that we already have, like middle-tier acquisition,
Oh,
instead of creating something totally new.
right.
Another idea was to create a digital requirements platform.
Oh, interesting.
And actually, they mentioned that on innovation.defense.gov.
Okay.
So they were definitely exploring different options.
So, bringing it all together for our listener, what's the big takeaway here? Like, what's the key message about Section 205 and these capstone requirements?
So I think the big takeaway is that Section 205 is a really ambitious effort to modernize how the military acquires new capabilities.
Right.
The goal is to get new tech into the field faster.
Right.
And to be more innovative by being flexible, by giving those PAEs more power, and by getting those operational folks involved earlier.
Yeah.
But to make this work, we need strong oversight.
Right.
We need to train everyone involved.
Yeah.
And we got to manage that, that pushback.
Resistance.
Yeah, that resistance to change that always happens.
Absolutely. So for you, our listener, this deep dive into Section 205, it really shows how the military is thinking about equipping itself for the future, right?
Right.
It's all about speed and innovation. But as we've seen, it comes with some pretty big challenges.
Yeah.
So I want to leave you with a question. What do you think is going to be the biggest hurdle in actually modernizing military acquisition? Is it finding that balance between flexibility and control?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's figuring out how to really integrate those frontline needs with those, complex acquisition processes?
That's a great question. It's a really complex problem, with a lot of moving parts. And I think you've hit on some of the key tensions there.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
You got it.
Into a really important part of this Forged Act, and I think it feels like we've just scratched the surface here of, what this means for the future of the military.
Definitely.
So keep thinking about those questions, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
You too.